Good one, Blizzard. But I don't think that taking nods from Elder Scrolls Online is all that bad of a thing for World of Warcraft. This is MultimediaJay Radio Style for Tuesday, October 8th, 2019. Let's start the show.
MultimediaJay Radio Style.
The plane meld is nigh. The plane meld is nigh. Yeah. So, one of the recurring themes when it comes to this World of Warcraft stuff in the podcasting that I've been doing about classic WoW and modern WoW is that of perspective. If you don't have the proper perspective on things, you will be snookered by Blizzard to no end and fishbowled into being completely wrapped around the WoW ecosystem. But once you get a proper perspective on things, like by playing another game and seeing how World of Warcraft stacks up to it, that's when you start realizing exactly what Blizzard is up to. I've talked about Blizzard fishbowling their audience before, and their player base and whatnot, and how if you don't know what Blizzard's up to, you'll easily get caught up in that stuff. But if you want a great example of Blizzard fishbowling in action, keep an eye on patch 8.3, Visions of N'Zoth. The Fishbowl patch is already off to a rip-roaring start. So, in the midst of everything that happened yesterday, I saw Ian Hazzikostas' latest on-camera appearance. Now, last go-round, we saw a little bit of remorse from the guy towards the end of the discussion. And I think I clipped it either on Twitter or on the blog. I should probably do the other if I've only done one of those two. But Ian Hazzikostas, towards the end of the discussion that was in June at the beginning of the summer, seemed to show some remorse for some of the design decisions that have gone into WoW in the last couple of years. Like an over-reliance on spec identity as opposed to class identity and stuff like that. So I was very curious as to what was going to happen with the first major announcement after the launch of Classic. Would this discussion continue? Because remember, the discussion at the beginning of the summer was in regards to patch 8.2. It was in regards to a patch, not necessarily announcements that are related to the next expansion. So I was hoping that this dialogue would continue, but we didn't see that. What we saw was a straight-up content preview. Could be the case, though, that with BlizzCon coming up, that the big announcements that I'm looking for are going to be discussed at BlizzCon. So we'll keep an eye on that, at least, in terms of whether or not I want to stay involved with this game or just go back to ESO and cut my losses on the subscription. Or I may just let the subscription lapse and just come back if I see something interesting at BlizzCon. But if Blizzard continues down the path they're continuing down, where this remorse is now going to be a thing of the past, and all we're going to see is content, and no discussion whatsoever about the entire rest of the world other than what's the current content set is, then I'm not convinced Blizzard is ever going to get better at this sort of thing, and I'm not convinced that World of Warcraft is ever going to catch up to its competition. These kinds of decisions need to be made at the top. And if these folks in charge don't want to make this decision, then there's other games I could be playing like ESO and Shadowbringers and even Star Wars The Old Republic, because these other games exist nowadays. And quite frankly, with some of the discussions we've had, hopefully highlighting just how WoW has fallen behind the 8-ball, we can now see that these other games are games worth playing. But let's talk about Visions of N'Zoth, aka Visions of Molag Bal. So I listened to Hazzikostas' presentation, and as I listened to his discussion about what's coming out in patch 8.3, something started to seem familiar. It seemed like I had seen this stuff before. And then it hit me, yes, I have seen this stuff before. I'm not connecting dots that aren't there. And the following day, today actually, I then saw that Blizzard is taking aim at ESO through the way they're responding to discussions and the way they're posting buffs and nerfs in the blue posts that they're posting now. That is straight up Zenimax's style. here's the change, and then right underneath it, there's the developers' thoughts behind it and why they chose to make the change that they did. The only difference between the way Blizzard handles it and the way Zenimax handles it is that Zenimax would use a spoiler tag, but that's on the official ESO forums, so it may not translate over to aggregator sites like MMO Champion, so who knows. But the style and the professionalism that I saw in this list of buffs and nerfs and what the developers' thoughts were behind it was something I could have seen on the ESO forums. But that's just icing on the cake. The big issue here is N'Zoth and the whole idea for this patch, and how if you are just a WoW player, it's going to sound like something new and interesting in modern WoW. If you have played ESO, though, this is very, very familiar. So let's take a look at what our picture of the day is here. It's 2 screenshots, one from the release, a publicity illustration, or screenshot if you want to call it, of Stormwind corrupted by the old god N'Zoth. As part of the new feature in the game called, I think it's Horrifying Visions or Horrible Visions or something, you're able to go into a scenario kind of like the Dark World in Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, but not really. It's not a straight redo of the idea. Blizzard, in all of this, by the way, is putting their own spin on things. They are taking things in their own direction. It's not a carte blanche copy-paste of something that has already existed in another game. But there are enough bells to ring if you follow what Hazzikostas revealed that, yes, if you've played other games, you've seen this before. Anywho, Corrupted Stormwind is basically the world as N'Zoth would like it if the old gods took over Azeroth. This is a very similar theme to what we see in the original Elder Scrolls Online game with Molag Bal. And that's why I've titled this Visions of Molag Bal, because I'm seeing parallels all over the place to between Molag Bal and N'Zoth. Now, I'm sure Blizzard is going to put enough originality into the N'Zoth character to make N'Zoth make sense in the Blizzard universe and not have it be like, oh, look, it's just the World of Warcraft version of Molag Bal. I'm sure Blizzard's going to be original enough, but the resemblances are pretty interesting. So the screenshot on the left, that's from ESO. That's the Hollow City right outside the chapel, looking across some rooftops to a tower in the distance. That is the Hollow City, which is actually an imperial town that was taken out of Tamriel by Molag Bal into Cold Harbor, his plane of oblivion. For those of you that don't know the lore behind Elder Scrolls, or maybe you're not into Elder Scrolls, Molag Bal is one of the Daedric princes, specifically the Daedric prince of schemes, domination, and cruelty. So his theme is one of oppression. Molag Bal wants to enslave all of the souls of the mortal races of Tamriel, and his part of Oblivion, Cold Harbor, or his plane of Oblivion as it probably should be called, Cold Harbor represents his desires to rule with an iron fist over the souls of the mortals of Tamriel. And in some areas in Cold Harbor, you'll see what are not only stuff taken out of Tamriel by Molag Bal, but you'll also see Tamriel basically reformed in his image, or in according to his desires to rule and whatnot. And that's what that tower is off in the distance. That's actually a replica of the White Gold Tower, which is the center of power in the Empire in Tamriel in Cyrodiil. It's basically the center of power in all of Tamriel, except in Cold Harbor, this structure, or the replica of it, I should say, is used as a prison. So what we see with Molag Bal is there's various parts of Cold Harbor that represent what he wished Tamriel was if he ruled the world, so to speak. A very clear parallel to N'Zoth's twisted visions of Stormwind and the Vale of Eternal Blossoms in Orgrimmar, corrupted by old god influence. So, maybe it's an archetype here, that the kind of villain that we're dealing with in both games has a very similar mindset of, I must be the one in charge of everything, and stuff like that. And just some more trivia for those of you not familiar with Elder Scrolls. Molag Bal is also the reason why vampires exist. The disease that causes vampirism is actually something Molag Bal introduced into Tamriel as a way of corrupting the life forms and whatnot to subjugate the mortals of Tamriel. So very, very nasty sounding stuff here. And it's part of the whole story arc with the original ESO. Not to spoil too much, but when you start playing an ESO, you'll see that folks in Tamriel are pretty nervous about a little something called the plane meld. Basically what that is Molag Bal wants Tamriel and Nirn as part of Cold Harbor. And so he's trying to merge the two planes together. And this sounds hauntingly familiar to the horrifying visions feature in patch 8.3. So the old god N'Zoth, released from his prison by the fall of Ashara, and of course I'm not gonna use any more spoilers than Hazzikostas did in his little presentation, but whatever. So this sets up the stage for a story about an old god running amok through Azeroth. An old god that is bent on, doing what old gods are gonna do. So what we see here with this feature in the game is the twisted visions of an old god who wants to basically destroy the existing order and basically turn Azeroth into what they want it to be, which is something really nasty. So corruption, subjugation, and definitely a lot of scheming. There are plenty of parallels to be found so far between N'Zoth and Molag Bal. So, but yeah, archetypes, the big bad villain, there's various types of villains out there, some of them more introverted and extroverted than others, some of them scheme and come up with evil plans to do things subtly under the table, so to speak, and others are a little more blatant, sometimes in a kid's cartoon fashion. I'm the bad guy, I'm gonna take down the good guys and destroy the world! Some villains are a little more explicit about their villainry than others. So I'm not going to spend too much time worrying about where these two villains fall among the scale of whether or not they're overt about their ambitions to ruin all of existence, but there are definitely parallels to be found between N'Zoth and Molag Bal, as well as the horrifying visions and what Molag Bal wants Oblivion to do to Nirn in the Elder Scrolls universe. Between this and how Blizzard talked about the balance changes with regards to putting the developers' thoughts very close to the post about the buffs and the nerfs, and not leaving things up to speculation or to really be torn apart on the forums all that much, basically eliminate the ability for there to be sensationalism by ensuring that the people that want to start stuff have nothing to go off of, that it's all plain knowledge that everybody knows. There's no real story there. Between all of this, I see definite nods to ESO, even though Blizzard is obviously taking things in their own direction to make the story fit within the Warcraft universe. Unfortunately, because, once again, content, and not necessarily the underlying problems between the various sets of content that exist within this game, I now look to BlizzCon for any hope whatsoever that this game is ever going to catch up to its competition. I was hoping that the first notable announcement after WoW Classic launched, and the developers saw the impacts of Classic versus what's going on with the current game, I thought that would provoke some kind of response other than, well, people got to level 60 and various bosses were downed, and stuff that was going to happen anyways. So now we look to BlizzCon, but quite frankly, if I don't hear something wonderful announced at BlizzCon that addresses the fundamental underlying problems of this game that have been causing problems for it since late Lich King, I think that will be a perfect time to just say, look, narcissists never want to admit when they're wrong. Blizzard has done more than enough narcissism collectively over the last 10 years for me to worry too much about World of Warcraft ever getting better and continue investing any significant amount of time into this game. Hey, if World of Warcraft turns into the kind of game where I just casually go through the story and then unsubscribe, it won't be the first MMO that made me want to do that. Star Wars The Old Republic is quite episodic, but when there isn't story content going on, it's kind of blah. Same thing with Guild Wars 2. Same thing with Final Fantasy XIV. In terms of the universe that I really want to get involved in and do stuff on my own, apart from the story content, the clear winner of all of these games is Elder Scrolls Online. But Elder Scrolls games have always had a massive emphasis on player freedom. And Elder Scrolls Online in its current state is not what it was when it first launched and Angry Joe was getting mad at the game for being lousy at everything. When the game first launched, like many other MMOs trying to dethrone WoW, it was chasing after WoW a little too much. But since Elder Scrolls Online has forged its own identity, it has become something very respectable. Apparently, in today's world, even to Blizzard. This is all speculation on my part, but I at least like to think that maybe I'm onto something here. Anywho, let's keep an eye on what gets announced in the road up to BlizzCon, and see if Blizzard is ever going to bring their game into the 2020s like its rivals already have. I'm getting a little ahead of myself recording this in 2019 saying that, but I think MMOs in the 2020s definitely need to evolve from what MMOs were in the 2010s and the 2000s. This is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.